Welcome to Lawline with your host, David Schnerman, an accomplished entrepreneur, attorney, and legal educator. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law, business, and education. And now we introduce our guest and our host, David Schnerman.
Hello, I'm David Schnerman, and welcome to Lawline. According to the Constitution, there should be a separation of church and state. However, to what extent do cities and states have the right to regulate the use of public schools by religious groups who want to hold religious functions and other services in the schools? To answer this question, we have Christine Kopec, who is a professor of business and ethics at Skidmore College, and Micah Bochart, who is a member of NOW and assistant producer at Lawline. Thank you for being here, Micah. Thank you for being here, Christine.
Thanks. I
want to get started with a broader question. And the broader question is, how far does religious freedom and expression in the United States go, and how does it really get into the school system?
Well, how far it goes, I think, would probably depend on which presidential candidate you ask right now.
Well, and that's the thing. This is a really timely topic because it's the year where you're going to hear about this a lot, and you hear some really nasty things out there being said. So how much of it is real, and how much of it is just rhetoric?
Well, a lot of it is posturing, as with many candidates in political races. They take a narrow point and carry it to a very large extreme. But the reality of the situation is we have 16 words in the Constitution that relate to religion, and they relate to that the Congress shall enact no law establishing religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so we have the dual clauses in the Constitution. One is the Establishment Clause, which essentially means that government cannot establish a state religion. One is the Free Exercise Clause, which says that you and I and everyone else, Rick Santorum, President Obama, can freely practice their religion, whatever that may be. And the Founding Fathers, Madison and Jefferson particularly, came out of were students of history, particularly European history, because that's where, of course, most people came from who were settled in the United States in the colonial era. And they saw the wrath that religion closely entwined with government wreaked on Europe, where there was no government that wasn't religiously based. God created the divine right of kings or queens or emperors, and they were forever intertwined. And as a result of what the founders saw in the historical record, Spanish Inquisition, religious wars in Europe, Martin Luther hanging his theses up and creating dissension among sects of Protestantism, made them say, whoa, not us, we're staying away from that, and we're going to try to prevent and create what Jefferson called the separation of church and state.
They also wanted no central bank, and now there's a Federal Reserve.
Well, can't get everything, and we might have a central religion, who knows?
Right. And so that's the question. So the separation of church and state, but certainly when you look to the politics, it's the number one thing that politicians say is the most important thing in their lives and what guides their principles. And even when George Bush was president, and you look to the Republican base, that's a big part of it. Where does the school system come into play, and what do you think the founders' intent really was? Do you think they wanted to be religious, to rule by, have religious morals, but not actually put them into law?
I would think that that's pretty close to it. I mean, obviously, anybody who's looked at constitutional analysis understands that there's tremendous division between those who believe in a sort of strict interpretation, strict construction of the Constitution, and those who believe that the Constitution is a living document and should be looked at in the context of problems of the day, whatever that day is, the 1800s, the 2000s. And in the religious context, it's tricky because clearly, while the founders, particularly again Madison and Jefferson, did not want a state religion, they were all religious men. We see God mentioned in the preamble. We see religion mentioned frequently in the colonies. Some colonies had state religions. We were considered a Christian nation for many of the early years of the founding. And so did they intend that there be no mention of God in schools? I mean, many people now say that was not the intent. Nonetheless, we live in a world now where we're much more inclined to draw lines in the sand. And so the Supreme Court's been drawing the lines more consistently against having religion play an overt role in public schools.
And we're going to get into specifics in New York City, actually, and as well as some other things politically. Mike, I just wanted to set the stage with your opinion and where you see, even just to say your own opinions in terms of how you see religion being based in terms of in the school system and actual expressions. Where do you draw the line?
Well, I mean, I think a really interesting, and critical point to make pertains to one's sense of identity, which is something that is very fundamental. And Christine, you were talking about drawing lines in the sand. Religion is a very clear identifier, especially when we live in an era where, say, one's ethnic or racial identity might be, more ambiguous. Religion is something that's very clear, and where identity is concerned, that's that becomes a very volatile question for the individual.
You raise a very good point here because of identity, and we now live in a much more pluralistic society than we certainly did when the clauses were put in the Constitution, where you could assume most people were practicing some religiously Christian-based faith. And that's not the case now. And so if you allow the incursion of religion in a formal sense into the schools, the question would be whose religion? Because now we can't assume anything. And in fact, what we have to assume is that in any given classroom, for example, you'd have 5, 10, maybe 15 different religions, faiths.
It's almost like, can we just get over this? Like, is it really that big a deal? No, but is it really that big a deal? It should be. It seems to be something that separates more than brings together. I read an article in Fox Business News on their site about in New Jersey. It was during Christmas. Someone brought a Santa Claus into a New Jersey public school. So someone complained that, well, if there's a Santa Claus there should be something for Hanukkah. And then there was a whole big thing, so they didn't bring the Santa Claus in. And it just seems like, and then what if there's other religions in there? So you bring other things in there. Is it really, at the end of the day, are we getting is it too much? And is it dividing us more than it's bringing us together? And how do we bring religion into the schools? Because in the first place, without having those issues. To
me, the question about Santa is somewhat ludicrous because last I knew, the Christian faith was not celebrating Santa. In fact, devout Christians deplore the use of the commercialism of the religious holiday by the use of Santa and holly and reindeer and things like that. So when schools get involved in the Santa Claus thing, I think that's pretty much is ridiculous. That there should be no reason why you can't celebrate Santa as the winter holiday, the gift-giving season. It's not religious per se. But yes, we should just get over it to some extent. But again, it goes back to Micah's point of identity and different faiths. How do we get over it? How does one not feel if you allow the display of some sort of religious, the menorah, for example, or the creche at Christmas, that you don't exclude, particularly in respect to schools, children who believe something else?
You said it's basically a Christian-based society, or
historically, yes.
So certainly that's changing over time as more and more religions come in here. So is that really the fundamental bigger picture thing, is what will be the future? Because you made a joke in the beginning. You said, well, maybe there will eventually be religion into the government.
It is frightening to me to listen to some candidates running for various political offices who seem to, for president, to be direct, who bring their own religious beliefs into campaigns. And then we'll turn around and say, well, I believe this, but I'm not going to impose this upon you. Well, but the kinds of policies you're advocating and the way you're presenting this seems to diminish my beliefs, which may be different from yours. And if you become president or governor or whatever you're running for, who's not to say that you will then not try to impose those beliefs, which are grounded in your religious faith, upon those who don't practice your religious faith? That's the problem.
I remember reading something about Rick Santorum saying something in regards to Obama and Satan.
And his theology being not Christian. And was ranting and raving when I heard that Obama's theology and his practices, his government practices, are not grounded in the Christian faith. And I said, yes, that's what they should be. They should not be grounded in the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or any faith. They should be not with respect to religion.
Right. No, and it's funny because you mentioned that, and we're talking about the school system here. It's like we have the elephant in the room where we're saying, okay, let's talk about the school system, but on a bigger picture, the law and the politics and people who are going for the top position are saying it's the most important thing in their lives, and they will lead based on that. But when it comes to schools are going to be separate. We're not going to talk about it there because it's it's not in the Constitution that there can't be religion in schools. It's just in the Constitution that there's no separation of church and state.
Well, there is religion in schools. You can't have an establishment of religion in a school. So you can't, for example, New York State, prior to 1962, the regents prepared a prayer that had to be read in every public school. Now, most of us would say, are you kidding?
Right.
And this was not that long ago. It wasn't in the Dark Ages. Until the case of Engel v. Vattel, where the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot have a teacher standing up in front of a room of impressionable young people and reading a prayer to them, no matter how non-sectarian that prayer may be, and it was, more or less, without that giving some sort of impression that the school is establishing or, in fact, promoting a particular religion, or leaving out the children who don't believe in any religion at all, who are atheists or don't believe in a religion that has a theistic approach.
So what's allowed now?
So you can't have a state or a school-sponsored prayer within schools. However, individual children can pray. People can say grace over before they eat a meal in the cafeteria. As people are wont to say, there's a whole lot of praying going on in schools before that math test. Please don't let me fail. And that's going to somebody, whomever you might think it is, but that's still permitted, and a good thing it is, because many of us have to engage in that.
Well, then, of course, there's the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes,
right?
well, there's a Pledge of Allegiance as well.
Well, which is not religion. It's that's to the United States.
Well, the under God.
The under God.
Line in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, the under God piece in the Constitution.
There was a lawsuit about that a while ago.
There's a never-ending lawsuit in California. It goes back and forth to the Ninth Circuit about whether it's unconstitutional to have under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. And because of the way the lawsuit was brought, it was decided at the Supreme Court level based on technicalities without addressing the actual issue of whether under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is unconstitutional. Many people believe that it is not.
You asked for my opinion earlier. I never circled back to it. I do find that problematic, personally. Mandating that students recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and in some cases can be sent to detention if they don't, say if they take issue with having to say under God, and if that doesn't accord with their belief systems. From a non-legal standpoint, I find that problematic.
That's exactly the argument that Newdow, the father in California, made about his children, that they were atheists, he was an atheist, and he was raising them that way, and that, in fact, being coerced into saying under God. And the issue with schools is particularly troublesome because there's this element of coercion, because you're talking about a 6-year-old or 12-year-old, you're talking about tremendous peer pressure in a way that's not the same with adults, where they may feel coerced to saying those words, even if in fact they don't believe them or it doesn't follow their religious belief.
I guess just this whole big thing, this can't we all just get along type thing is what we get so down to the
peacemaker here.
Well, you get so down to the nitty gritty. It just seems like, again, what's the big deal? In general, shouldn't we just be open to more discussion? Isn't that what school is about learning about other religions, about seeing what's going on, and understanding that other people have different points of view? Because it seems like if it's out there in the political space and it's Christian values versus not, it seems like in the school it's okay just to have these conversations versus shutting it down from the school's point of view.
Well, you can have, religion again is not prohibited from being studied in schools with respect to comparative religions, with respect to being part of a global history class or a world religions class in which you're studying religion as the various philosophical differences without crossing the line into what might be practicing a religion or explaining the particular tenets of particular faith. I mean, religions inform most of the societies of the world. Most individuals' decisions are influenced in some way by their moral or ethical beliefs, which are often grounded in religion. So that's still available in schools, and in fact is a useful thing. The more we all know about different faiths and different people's approaches to life based on their religion, probably the better society is. But that doesn't mean we should allow people to be preaching or having, you just said you have young children. Do you want them to go to a school where a kindergarten teacher happens to be espousing an evangelical Christian belief that you don't subscribe to, and somehow having your children pray every morning? And I think most of us would say no, irrespective of what the teacher's religious beliefs were.
My answer to that, and then we're going to go to break, is I would be open to them learning about who this person is and what their belief is, and learning about that religion. Certainly praying is something that can be done in the school. It doesn't have to be done in the class. It can be done in in a voluntary area, and I think that is kind of being done, but just not from the school's point of view.
Well, certainly private prayer is.
Sure. So we're going to go to break. After break, I want to talk about two topics. One is what's going on right now in New York public school systems with religious groups trying to use the schools themselves. And secondly, what Obama recently wanted to do with contraception and the controversy around that. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
It's simple. Gable top and aseptic cartons go in the blue. That's Gable top milk and juice cartons with a triangle on top, and aseptic soup, juice, and soy milk cartons go in the blue with glass, metal, and plastic. For more information about correct recycling, go to grownyc.org.
I'm lucky. I get to do something I love. How many of you think homework is just as important as teamwork? I help keep kids in school. Good. And that's the name of the game. My name is LaDania Thomason. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, live united.
There's no need to complicate. Our time is short. This is our fate. I'm yours.
Hi, you're watching Lawline. I'm David Schnerman. Today's topic is religion in schools. Our guests are Christine Kopec, professor at Skidmore College, and Micah Bochart, who is a member of NOW as well as a producer at Lawline. Christine, before the break, we were talking about, I said we'd mention when we came back to what's going on in New York City's public schools right now. I know there's a lawsuit regarding religious institutions trying to use the school building. Number one, what is the issue?
Well, the issue is that the Board of Education in New York City has for a long time had a regulation governing the use of schools and with respect particularly to religious groups, and the current version of that prohibits schools from hosting religious worship services. In the specific case is in PS 15, where the Bronx Household of Faith, which is a small local religious group, has been holding services on Sundays in PS 15 for several years, and has been in litigation for most of that period of time. However, in 2007, the Board of Education was prohibited from enforcing the regulation that it had, saying that you could not have religious worship services within the school. That was recently decided on appeal just last year in June of 2011, that the Board of Education could enforce that because there was a fear that by having an actual church service or a religious worship service within a public school, you would be encroaching on that establishment clause, and certainly to the outside observer it was possible that they could assume that the church was somehow related to the education in that school, and that the children in that school were perhaps supportive of that religion or a part of it, when that would not be the case. The Supreme Court refused to take the case any further. They did not grant certiorari, and so as of December and early January of this year, the Board of Ed was prepared to go ahead and evict religious institutions, including the Bronx Household of Faith, who had heretofore been holding religious services in the school until last week.
And what happened last week?
Last week, the original judge who issued the order saying the Board of Ed could not carry out its regulation, despite the fact that two courts have said they could, issued another order saying they still can't. She issued a 10-day injunction prohibiting the Board of Ed from enforcing this based on what she thinks is a reasonable degree of potential harm that the Bronx Household of Faith may suffer, and she believes that they have a likelihood upon further litigation of winning the case, which frankly seems unlikely given that it's been through 2 appeals and the Supreme Court refused to take the case any further. Nonetheless, that's the situation right now. As of February 16th, a 10-day injunction was issued saying the Board of Ed could not prevent the Bronx Household of Faith from having its worship in the PS 15.
Now, the question is this something that, do some religious organizations have more access to schools than others, and how big an issue is this, or how big is this something that's used a lot? You would think public schools or public institutions, it makes sense.
Well, you know, obviously public schools in many communities, I live in a small town in upstate New York, and the only building large enough to host any sort of fairly large community group is a school. And in fact, schools can grant access to groups that have a religious orientation. for clubs for students, for example, for a church who wants to run an adult ed kind of class. In fact, under the good news case that the Supreme Court decided not that long ago, if a school opens its doors to community groups, Boy Scouts, for example, the local artistic group, then it has to open the doors equally, including to people who have a religious perspective. But that's different from a worship service.
So where do you think it's a good thing if religion and this type of thing would be banned from schools moving forward, or would that lead to detriment to society in general?
Well, I mean, I think even the appellate decision in the Bronx household case discussed the possibility that students and outsiders can believe that the church, this particular church and the school are entwined, and that there may be establishment issues, but then again they might not. I mean, people may very well understand that this is a building that the community is going to use, and that in fact having a religious service there is not it's closely entwining religion and the state in a way that the founders did not intend. That decision is still open, and I think my personal view is that it's probably not a good idea to have actual worship within a building. A building seems to me to become sanctified in a way when a religious service is held there, and somehow that, at least for the time people are there doing that, it changes the nature of the school, and perhaps that's not a good message to send, again, to impressionable young people.
But I think it's worth talking a little about some of the collateral damage, though. I mean, we've been talking a lot about what this means for freedom or the lack thereof of religion. But I know I was reading a lot about. Well, you asked about, do certain groups have more access than others? I mean, I don't know about the degree of access that they have, but I do know that certainly in terms of what would be affected by what's happening in New York, it was largely Christian groups who did feel that it was an assault against their identity because they were going to be the ones using it. Like, they saw this as an many groups saw this as an anti-Christian agenda. But what I was going to say, the question is raised of, what does this mean for the community? We're talking about religious functions that can, have a charitable element, can bring people in the community together, can bring hope, can, be the vital contribution to the community of which that they're a part that religion has so frequently been throughout history. So I think it's worth kind of raising that question. Obviously, that wouldn't be something that would be resolved within the conversation of say this particular case, but I think it's worth keeping the the real world in mind and raising the question, what is this actually going to mean? Well, we're not talking about a vacuum here.
I think it's interesting, though, that Christian groups are often the ones that stand up and say this is an assault on Christianity, on the established churches in America, when in fact the problem is that Christianity is still a dominant religion, and it's the other religions and people, particularly children of other faiths, who feel put upon, that their religion is not displayed in the same way, not necessarily celebrated in the same generic, general way that Christianity is, and that having Christian churches, particularly, and this church is Christian, and the only day that schools are generally open, that school functions aren't being carried on, are Sundays, which means most groups that would use the facility would be Christian. It would in fact be favoring the Christian church. And again, what does that say to the student who's a Muslim or a Buddhist or
Christine, we
whatever
actually
else?
have a minute left, and I really want to get into the Obama mandate with condoms. I know a minute is a
with contraception.
With contraception, I'm sorry.
That raises the issue of you've got churches, particularly the Catholic Church in this context, who says their religious beliefs prevent them from using contraception or paying for insurance that would provide contraception, and then you have the rights of women to have access to contraceptive from their employer's insurance company. So we've got the issue of the Catholic Church as an employer, which is somewhat different than the Catholic Church as a church. As a church, it's clearly entitled to believe what it believes and to support those values fully. As an employer, I think the question is more open about whether or not they should be able to be exempted from the laws that other employers under the new religion, or under the new healthcare law, will have to follow.
How do you think it will play out?
Well, right now, of course, they're trying to find some sort of middle ground.
Sure.
But I think it seems to me that the Obama administration is moving to treating the Catholic Church as an employer with some easier way to provide the contraceptive insurance coverage than the church actually paying for it. I don't know if that's the way to go, though.
Well, in terms of where we are right now, in terms of election year, there's a lot of these things that will be put out in the forefront and then probably forgotten about afterwards, as always is. And the goal is religion, as we talked about, is about freedom of expression. And the most important thing is, I heard a lot in a lot of the arguments that you were saying was kids are impressionable.
Yeah.
It also seems like kids want to learn more, and it seems like you would think you shouldn't be scared about your kids being learning about another religion. And so that's where I think in my mind, it's if they hear about another religion that they're just gonna switch over to that. So certainly there is a fine line. Mike, I'll give you the last word in terms of where you see things going in religion in schools right now.
Well, I mean, certainly speaking to your last point about contraception and whatnot, I don't see that being an issue that goes away. And I think that does speak to identity again, and the sense that the sense of empowerment. I think we can talk about religiously disempowering people, as you did, but I think we can also talk about, say, women feeling disempowered about access to what I would argue is vital care, and what keeps them healthy and alive. So,
spoken like a now supporter.
Mike, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and Christine, I want to thank you for coming down here. Really enjoyed having you on. I want to do it again and see what happens throughout this election year and afterwards. And I want to thank you once again for watching Lawline. We'll see you the same time next week.
You've been watching Lawline with your host, David Schnurman. Mr. Schnurman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please send an email to info@lawline.com.